a clean energy source for future energy demands. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you very much. When I was asked to give this talk by Kerry some time ago, I'd just recently given a talk in Sydney on the nuclear disaster in Fukushima and what it meant for both the industry and what it meant for people in Japan and people worldwide. And Kerry asked me to give this talk, and I was a little bit reticent because, one, I have a vested interest in the nuclear industry. Obviously, I'm the CEO of a uranium exploration company, and I don't want anyone to think I don't have a vested interest. And two, I'm certainly no expert in the sense that I'm a nuclear physicist, okay, or anything like that. I'm a geologist. I've been a geologist for 21 years. I have a PhD in geology. I am a science nerd. I love science. I read about science extensively and the history of science, but I don't want you to think that I'm someone that I'm not. Okay? If you're already anti-nuclear, then nothing I say today is going to change your mind. Okay? It doesn't matter. You're fixed, and that's a reflection on you and not a reflection on the facts of the story that I'm about to tell. What else do I want to say? I've had quite an extensive time in the nuclear industry now. I've been with ACAP for about the last 5 years exploring for uranium in Botswana. And prior to that, I had a few years with Paladin. And again, I've taken a lot of influence from John Borshoff, the CEO of Paladin, who is a champion of the uranium and the nuclear industry, and was the first person to open my eye, really, about the dangers of CO2 pollution. Not that I'm a great believer in global warming, but I'm certainly against coal in terms of the amount of pollution, and I'll address some of those facts today. But before we can go ahead, and as I say, Kerry told me to make this about education, we have to go back. So I'm going to use some lecture notes from my years as a lecturer at University of Tasmania to teach you a few basic things. This is the periodic table of the elements, and this is how we look at the basic elements that we're all made up of, the basic building blocks of matter. And we can see the simple ones like hydrogen, which is the simplest element. I love these sticks because I used to belt them on the desk when the students went to sleep, so be careful. All right, so the simplest ones like hydrogen, and then there's a couple others that we're going to talk extensively about today. Carbon, we're all made of carbon, okay, and oxygen, which forms 20% of the atmosphere, which we breathe. So we're going to talk a bit about those, and this is how we look at the table and how we classify the elements. And then here's a simple reaction, okay, for burning carbon, such as wood or coal. Okay, it's a generic reaction. It's not an exactly balanced reaction in oxygen to form CO2 and water. This is what happens when we burn coal. Okay, this is called a chemical reaction. Okay, it only involves the outer shell electrons of the elements, and we get power from this. This is what's called an exothermic reaction. In other words, it gives off heat, and we use that heat to boil water. Okay, and turn a turbine and generate electricity. So the question is this a good thing to do, or is it a bad thing to do? Is it an efficient way to generate electricity? We all know it works. Let's have a look at some of the efficiencies. I've got to give you a bit more stuff, and again, these are first-year notes from the University of Tasmania. Okay, just a few things so that you understand what I'm talking about later. So when we look at an element like carbon, we typically look at how many protons it has in the nucleus. Protons are positively charged fundamental particles that exist in the nucleus, and they're often accompanied by neutrons, which have no charge. So in carbon-12, we have 6 protons and 6 neutrons. That's why it's called 12, because we add those two numbers together, okay? And orbiting that in the neutral atom will have the same number of electrons as we have of protons. So it's pretty simple stuff, really. So today, though, I'll typically refer to elements by their atomic weight rather than their atomic number. So things like U-235. All uranium, for example, has 92 protons. But some uranium has different numbers of neutrons. Okay, so we have U-235, U-238, 236, etc. Okay, and these are called isotopes. So isotopes have the same number of protons, but different numbers of neutrons. And this is the simplest case. Hydrogen, which we all know, the simplest element, okay, quite flammable, and it has 1 proton and 1 neutron in most cases, but hydrogen has some isotopes. One is called deuterium, which has an extra neutron, and one is called tritium, which has 2 extra neutrons. Okay, you will have heard, if you have known anything about nuclear power, you will have heard of heavy water. Okay, heavy water is water that's largely composed of deuterium. Okay, it's about 11% heavier than normal water. And they use that for certain reactions inside a nuclear reactor, particularly the CANDU reactors in Canada. So now, what you should know is that some isotopes of particular elements are naturally occurringly radioactive. In other words, over time, they decay into different elements by different, there's several different decay paths, alpha decay, beta decay, gamma decay, fission, etc. Okay, so you don't need to know the details of that, but it's a naturally occurring phenomena. Doesn't require any input from us. We can speed it up a little bit if we want to. We can slow it down a little bit if we want to. But it's something that occurs right throughout nature and throughout history. So let's go back to the periodic table and let's have a quick look at some of the well-known radioactive elements. And some of them you'll be surprised. Carbon has a radioactive isotope. Carbon-14. Okay, it's the isotope that we use to date stuff. You all have heard of carbon dating. Okay? Iodine, been mentioned a lot around Japan lately. Potassium. Potassium has a radioactive isotope. Okay, it has an extremely long half-life. I'll tell you what a half-life is in a moment. But there's a lot of potassium in the Earth. Okay, and the inside, everyone knows, or every geologist knows certainly, that the inside of the Earth is very hot. The inside of the Earth is as hot as the outside of the sun. All that heat comes from radioactive decay of potassium. Okay? So radioactivity is in and around us all over the place, strontium, radium, and the one that we're going to talk about today, uranium-92. In other words, 92 protons, but varying amounts of neutrons to get 237, 238, 234, 235, etc. Last thing I'm going to talk to you about from my old lecture notes, and I can put my stick down, I hope, is this concept of half-life. The concept of half-life is something that we know very well from our studies of radioactive isotopes, and that is if we have an amount of radioactive material, and let's just say we have this amount of radioactive material, okay, in a half-life, if we come back, and if we looked at uranium-235, the half-life is 700 million years. So if we come back in 700 million years, half of the uranium will be gone, and the other half will be daughter products. Doesn't matter what they are. Don't worry about that. It's the same for any isotope. So some isotopes have very short half-lives, milliseconds. Some have half-lives of days. Some like uranium, have half-lives of hundreds of millions of years. Potassium is another one. Half-life of half the age of the Earth, 2.5 billion years, I think. So you can see what's important about this is that after 4 or 5 half-lives, most of the original product is gone. So these are half-lives here. So we have 100% of whatever it was, let's say iodine, and after 4 half-lives, there's virtually only 1/16 of the iodine left. So after 5 half-lives, whatever it is that you're worried about is gone. Okay? So that's an important point when we get to Fukushima. Oop, wrong way. Right, so what I want to tell you today about is the opposite of a chemical equation and a chemical reaction. Okay, it's called fission. It's the power of not the electrons outside the atom, but the nucleus inside the atom. And why is it so powerful, and how do we understand that? Well, we understand that because of this great man, Albert Einstein, and his theory of special relativity. Okay, and you've all seen this equation before, E equals mc squared. Now, I don't know if you know what it means, so I'm going to tell you whether you know or not. Okay, E stands for energy. That's what we're after. The world is, we've heard day after day about the energy demands of the growing world. China, India, everyone wants a mobile phone, everyone wants a house, a car. Okay, so energy, that's what we're after. M is mass, very simple. Okay, C is the important one in this equation. C is the speed of light. Now, the speed of light is an enormous number, about 300,000 kilometres per second. And when you square it, it becomes a ridiculously huge number. Okay, so if you multiply the mass by the speed of light squared, you get an enormous number. That is where the energy from this fission comes from. So we're going to look at uranium fission, 235. 235 is one of the isotopes of uranium. It's less than 1% of all naturally occurring uranium. And we bombard that with a single neutron. It turns into 236. 236 is unstable, and it immediately, or very close to immediately, splits. And in that process, right there, we unleash enormous amounts of power and some radiation. Okay? Let's have a look at how much power. So here's a graph that compares the power of various fuels that we know, okay, to uranium. And you look at that, and there's brown coal, firewood. Look at the brown coal. I mean, that's pretty exciting right there, isn't it? We'd be better off chopping trees down and burning that. More power out of firewood than bloody brown coal. Black coal's better, gas is okay. Crude oil, you can see how much extra power comes out of uranium. But of course, this is what's called a log scale, same way we measure earthquakes. Okay, you may not be familiar, but each one of those is worth 10. If I was to show you this on a normal graph, which you might be more used to, that's what it's going to look like. The others don't even register. Okay, so they have powers in the order of 35 to 40 megajoules per kilogram. Uranium has power of 500,000 megajoules per kilogram. Massively, ridiculously different. Okay, so let me tell you some cool facts about it. 1 tonne of uranium is equivalent to burning 16,000 tonnes of coal, or 88,000 barrels of oil. 1 kilogram of coal will power a 40-watt light bulb for 4 days. 1 kilogram of uranium will power the same 40-watt light bulb for 140 years. Okay? It is on a completely different scale. It's not the same. Okay? And look at this. Here we have a photo from the Age newspaper of ships lined up offshore. You know, why is that? Well, 1, because we never spend any money on infrastructure in Australia, but that's another story. Okay, but 2, taking coal from Australia back to China or wherever else, thermal coal. In 2009, we exported 132 million tonnes of thermal coal. Okay, 132. These are figures from ABARE. 132 million tonnes of thermal coal. In the same year, we exported 10,000 tonnes of uranium, 1 shipload. There is more power in that 1 shipload of uranium than in all those goddamn shiploads of coal that we exported that year. It's a joke. All right? It's a joke, and the joke's on Australia at the moment. Let's have a little look at the nuclear fuel cycle. I have already told you that I'm really only involved in this part of it, which I didn't even put the word exploration in, but we're explorers for uranium in Botswana. So I know a great deal about that. What happens, we'll be in production in 2013 or 2014. We will produce a uranium oxide. That uranium oxide gets transported away from us and taken various places, only 3 or 4 places around the world, and it gets converted, okay, into what's called UF6, uranium hexafluoride. Okay, so that's the first process, an industrial process, uranium hexafluoride. From there, it goes to an enrichment facility. Remember that the isotope of uranium that we want is U-235, and that is less than 1% of all naturally occurring uranium. So we enrich that uranium to be about 3%. Okay, it's called low-enriched uranium. If we want to make an atomic bomb, we have to enrich it to 99, 98, 97%. Atomic bombs are not easy to make. These are complex industrial processes. Okay, so we have to make massively enriched uranium. The leftover U-238 is taken off and it becomes depleted uranium, and sometimes is used in bullets, and you will have heard about depleted uranium munitions. Okay, then we take that low-enriched uranium into another factory and we convert it back to a uranium dioxide, and then we make it into small little pellets, about the size of this, in fact, and we put them inside a fuel chamber. They're designed specifically for the reactor that they're going into, and they go to a nuclear power plant. Okay, and there's different reactor designs that require different amounts of fuel rods, etc., and it produces electricity. Okay, it's a pretty simple process. What happens from there is that some of the, when the fuel is used up after a couple of years, okay, we put it into a spent fuel pool, and I'll show you a photo of one of those later. Some countries, such as France, reprocess their fuel, so they reprocess about 97% of everything that goes in, goes around the circuit again. Some countries, such as America, don't reprocess, and they store 100% of what was in the reactor. So, but lots of reprocessing is clearly the way to go, because you can reuse 97% of the fuel that went in there in the first place. Again, showing how effective this is at producing power. So, we've got to talk about what happened in Fukushima. I've given you a bit of background about the nuclear industry and how it works. It's now time to tell you what happened in Fukushima. Fukushima was an absolute disaster, okay? There's no doubt about that. Both both for Japan in terms of the tsunami and the 20-odd thousand people that it killed, but also in terms of the nuclear industry and what happened on site. Okay? They had the 5th largest earthquake ever measured. Okay? So just to give you some perspective on that, okay, they had planned for an 8.4 earthquake. They got a 9. That's 6 times bigger. Remember, it's a log scale. It was about 28 times bigger earthquake than the one that flattened Christchurch late in 2010. So it's a massive earthquake. It generated... So what happens? Okay, what happens when you get an earthquake at a nuclear power plant? We shut them down immediately. We put in what's called control rods, which are carbon and boron, and they absorb those neutrons that require the reaction to go ahead. Okay, that chain reaction, remember the neutron goes into the 235 and converts it to 236. Other neutrons are given out in a chain reaction, but we can absorb those neutrons with carbon and boron, so we take them out of the reaction and we shut down the uranium reaction very, very quickly. So the uranium stops reacting within about 20 seconds. Very quick. However, and this is the problem with nuclear power, one of the issues, is that the daughter products of that reaction chain continue to produce heat for some time. Now, everyone knows that's the issue, and so we plan around that and we make sure that we have backup power. Because the power plant itself is no longer producing any power. So we've got backup power, which is diesel generators. We got hit by somewhere now, we reckon, a 12 to 15 metre tsunami, which knocked out the diesel generators. It didn't just knock out the generators, it knocked out everything. Pumps, electrical gear, everything got wiped out. And it actually killed a couple of guys who were in one of the power stations at the time. So then we have 8 hours of battery power left to get the power back on, because we need to circulate water around this core, okay, because it's still producing heat because of the daughter products. Not because of the uranium, but because of the daughter products. So we need to keep that water circulating, and in the absence of power, we can't do it. So after 8 hours, the water stops circulating, the temperature rises, the pressure rises, temperature and pressure related, and they had to let it out. And so they let out that gas, that vaporised water, and a lot of it was hydrogen, which gets dissociated because of the intense radiation inside a nuclear reactor. And they had a hydrogen explosion. So the explosions that you saw at Fukushima were not nuclear explosions. Okay, you cannot have a nuclear explosion at a nuclear plant. There's simply not enough enriched uranium. They were hydrogen explosions. But of course, that created quite a bit of radiation going all around the place. And then they were stuffed, really. All their infrastructure was gone. They couldn't pump water in. They didn't have any supplies of clean water anymore, so they had to pump seawater in, which is a very bad thing. Seawater has lots of ions and dirt in it, which can get radioactive. Typically, in a nuclear reactor, you use very, very clean water, which absorbs no radiation. You can swim in it if you wanted to. I don't know. Probably wouldn't be a great idea, but anyway. And so, you know, what we've seen at Fukushima it has all been contained within this large containment vessel. Why is that different than Chernobyl? Chernobyl didn't even have a containment vessel. Okay, and we've seen release of radioactivity into the environment, largely into seawater. So let me talk to you a little bit about radiation and radiation dosages, because it's important that you understand what sort of dosages affect you. Okay, now we measure radiation dosages in a thing called sieverts. Okay, and that's the biological effect. We also use becquerel. In fact, there's a lot of different terms. The Americans use Grays and someone else uses REMS. It's bloody confusing. But this is what we use, it's sieverts. It's the biological effect of radiation. So we have, just like metres, you know, we can have millimetres. So we have millisieverts, which is 1,000th of a sievert. So about 8 sieverts or 8,000 millisieverts will kill you 100% of the time. I'm not trying to tell you radiation's not good for you. It's bloody high radiation is bad for you. It will kill you. But that's a massive dose. Half of that, 4,000 millisieverts, will kill you about 50% of the time. Less if you get immediate treatment. 1,000 millisieverts, or 1 sievert, will make you sick, but it will have no long-term effects on you, generally speaking. Although it probably will increase your rate of cancer down the road. But there's a lot of research that is not too clear on that. Fukushima, what was the maximum dose? Okay, the maximum dose that anyone has received, all those guys who work on the plant, the maximum dose received has been 250 millisieverts, which is 1/4 of the amount of radiation that it takes to make you sick, let alone have long-term effects. And there's one other thing about this. Like absolutely crapping themselves about radiation. You can't hear it, you can't see it, you can't smell it. But we all know it's bad for you. Okay? And it's a bit like a lot of radiation is very bad for you. Sorry, it's my phone. Beg your pardon. It's actually my broker. Just take this for a second. Uranium, up to $100. Yeah, buy. Okay. Right.
That costs you $50, though.
That's that was radiation. That was microwave radiation going through my head right then. Who's going to stop using their phone because microwave radiation goes in their head? It's just another form of radiation. We get radiation from the lights. We get radiation from everywhere. We evolved in a radiation-rich environment, okay? And the analogy that I can give you is if you drink 10 bottles of wine a day, you're stuffed. If you drink 3 bottles of wine a day, you're probably stuffed eventually, all right? But if you have a glass or 2 of wine a day, it's probably good for you, okay? It's called the linear no threshold theory. In other words, something that's bad for you in a high dose can be good for you in a low dose. And it appears that radiation is much the same. It's a complex phenomena, and there's a lot of junk going around in the goddamn papers about people saying that low-dose radiation is terrible for you, okay? Yes, high dose is bad for you, absolutely. It causes cancer, it causes all sorts of stuff, and it burns you physically, okay? But there's quite a lot of evidence, and good Australian evidence from the University of Adelaide that suggests that low-dose radiation can be quite good for you. I've lost my... Thank you. Right, so what were the radiation levels at Fukushima? And this is a 1 hourly snapshot, real data that you can download from the web. Okay, and you can see that on this day, and this was quite soon after the major explosions, and so the radiation levels were quite high. And you can see the wind was blowing towards the northwest on this day. You can see the elevated readings up here compared to down here. The highest reading, which was on the edge of the evacuation zone, was 58 microsieverts, 58 millionths of a sievert. How long does that take to get you sick? You have to be exposed to that for about 100 days, 24 hours a day, before you get to the very lowest level where we think radiation is dangerous. Okay? So radiation in this environment wasn't really a big deal, in my opinion. And what we'll see, I believe the ultimate consequences of Fukushima have been very much limited to the site. And what you've seen in the Australian media and the reporting of the Australian media and the worldwide media and the leftist bloody rags like The Age is a disgrace. All right? Yes, radionuclides have been released into the sea, but the sea is goddamn huge, and because there's current, they will take it away. Only 2 radiation workers on site have received big dosages. There was never any chance of an atomic explosion. It's not really a Chernobyl. There's no apocalypse. Okay? And in terms of the 20,000 people who got killed in the earthquake, it's a goddamn sideshow. It will take a long time to shut the plants down, and there is massive radiation damage inside those buildings, and it will take a long time to remediate that, but it will be done, and the nuclear industry will move on. So let's have a look at the future now. I'm going to become a futurist, even though I've never met Al Gore, but anyway. So let's have a look at the predicted growth rate. There's about, with the 5 reactors shut down in Japan, this number's a little bit out of date, but let's say 430 reactors operating worldwide. There's another 59 being built right at this second. Okay, there's another 149 in advanced stages of planning approval. And there's about another 300 that have started planning an EIA, etc. So over the next 20 years, these are not my figures, this is World Nuclear Authority figures, we're going to look at doubling the world reactor fleet. There is already not enough uranium to supply the current fleet, let alone the number fleet, the big fleet that's predicted. So there's a massive growth in uranium coming, and that's because it's such an efficient power source. Okay? Post-Fukushima, all the big players have recommitted to nuclear. China, South Africa, India, the UK. In fact, the only one who hasn't is Germany. Who's the only one who gets publicity? Bloody Germany. All right? I don't want to talk too much about economics because really I'm no economics and I'm no economist. But what I do want to show you is, particularly even if you take out the cost of CO2, so this is nuclear, you might not be able to read those, nuclear, gas and coal, and the cost of generating power. Okay, I haven't got the right graph up there, but I'm pretty sure that's a megawatt of power. you can see that it's quite cost competitive. Even if you take out the cost of CO2 from the coal, it's still around the same things. So it's not double the cost, it's a similar cost to what we're used to paying. One of the other important things, it's very insensitive to the input price of uranium. So if the cost of coal goes up, because that's a very big component of generating power, then fuel goes up. But if the cost of uranium goes up, it has very little effect on the price of power. So that's a good thing. And the price of uranium has to go up. It's very clear to me. Let's have a talk about emissions now. We all know this is the bad news. This is a picture of Loy Yang in Victoria, where we burn some of the worst coal in the world. And I saw with horror the other day that Ted Baillieu's talking about exporting goddamn brown coal from Victoria. I mean, it's horrific. Sorry. So this is about a 1 megawatt plant, 1,000... anyway, I'm sorry, I've just misplaced the figure there. But this plant produces 700 million tonnes of CO2 a year. Now, you can listen to Plimer, whether you do or not, you know, I don't care. CO2 is the gas of life, blah, blah, blah. Who cares? I tell you, it's a lot of CO2 to be producing, and I think the jury's out, so, you know, that's a lot. What it also produces is 200,000 tonnes of sulphur dioxide. Whether you think CO2 is the gas of life or not, let me assure you that bloody sulphur dioxide is not the gas of life. It is a poison. Okay? Don't want to be breathing sulphur dioxide. Let's have a look at the direct emissions from coal, gas. Okay, you can see these are the emissions from burning the fuel. Okay, gas is better than coal by about half. Okay, this is in grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. And of course, the renewables, hydro, solar, wind, nuclear, they don't have any emissions of CO2 from the actual burning of the fuel or however they generate the power. So people say, well, hydro, well, we can't do hydro in Australia. We've already done it. We don't have much water. So hydro's out for us. Solar and wind, fantastic. Jesus Christ, in Broken Hill, they should set up a wind farm. It hasn't stopped blowing while I've been here. And certainly, but I wouldn't bother setting up a solar farm here because I haven't seen the sun for 4 days. But the sun doesn't shine all the time and the wind doesn't blow all the time. We know that. So if you need power all the time, that means you have to set up huge battery sources to back up those power sources. And as they increase, so solar and wind, they're fine if they're 4 or 5% of your power and you're not reliant on it. But if you take those up to 20 or 30%, you have to build such big battery capacity that it completely blows this stuff out of the water. These things become so expensive if you increase them as a percentage of your grid. Yes, they're cheap, but they're pretty inefficient. You have to set up lots and lots of wind turbines. You have to set up lots and lots of solar cells, lots of metal to mine and setting them up. They're a blight on the environment, you know, because you've got to set them up everywhere. I would argue that, you know, and having driven around France, as I'm sure many of you have, which is 80% powered by nuclear, you don't see that many nuclear plants, and there's really no blight. You don't notice them, you know. And I think it's a great industry. Just quickly, where are we now in terms of the evolution of power? Okay, the reactor that blew up in Japan was what's called a Generation 2 reactor, and getting quite old. Okay, old designs, a boiling water reactor or a pressurised water reactor, they're old. We're now in Generation 3, much more safe. Passive safety systems that don't require electrical input to operate. Gravity-fed cooling, for example. So if all the power goes out, like it happened, then they continue to cool themselves. And they're using new and better coolants. Okay, not just water. They're using liquid sodium and, you know, all sorts of crazy technology, which I don't have the background to understand. Pumps that have no moving parts, you know, nuclear power that has virtually no moving parts, so things can't go very wrong with it. And reactor design is improving, and it will continue to improve on the back of Fukushima. Mistakes have been made. We have to design these things. We have to seismically isolate them. We can do that very well now. We know a lot about seismicity and a lot about how to isolate buildings from seismicity, so we can do that. So nuclear designs are going to get safer and safer. However, here's where I reckon the future is, and you might not know much about this. Small mobile reactors. Little tiny reactors that are completely self-contained and have no moving parts whatsoever. And all they do is generate heat. They're small, they produce about 25 megawatts. Okay, enough to power, say, 20,000 homes, or maybe 2 of them to power Broken Hill. Because I drove up here the other day from Mildura and drove along the high tension lines all the way. I don't know where that power comes from, presumably some coal-fired hellhole. Okay? Why wouldn't we bury a couple of these out on Plimer's farm? Okay, because he'd be happy, he wouldn't care. And we pump some water down to him, we heat the water, because these are just giant heat generators. We turn the water into steam, we turn the turbines. Broken Hill self-sufficient. Broken Hill, Alice Springs, Mount Isa. Kalgoorlie. How many remote towns do we have in Australia that can be powered by these things? $50 million. When they run out of power, they come out, they take it away, they put a new one. You bury them, you guard them, they can't be stolen. There's not that much uranium in them, you can't use them to enrich and fuel up. This is the future. Not the big 1,600 megawatt giants that are being made. This is the future of nuclear power, in my opinion. Fantastic, and fantastic for Australia. And we should be, we won't because we're piss weak, but we should be having a look at this. Waste disposal. Everyone whines about waste disposal. Oh my God, what are you going to do with the waste? Right? Well, the same power plant that produces 700 million tonnes of CO2 a year produces 27 tonnes of spent fuel. Right? Same equivalent for what I told you before. From coal-fired, 27 tonnes. 97% of that can be reprocessed. So we're left with 700 kilos of what we call high-level waste. Extremely radioactive, absolutely. Right? 700 kilos of high-level waste, you know, it's about that big. Fit inside a barrel. It's very dense. It's very high specific gravity. So 700 kilos versus 700 million tonnes of CO2. What are you going to do? All right? What are they finished going to do? They're going to bury it. Got approval, being made. Fantastic. Australia should set up a deep geological repository in the Pilbara, the Earth's oldest crust, geologically stable, no groundwater, politically stable. We have the technology. We could build a mine, dump it down there, cover it with synrock, cement, whatever we wanted. Okay? And, you know, you say, well, do we really want to be taking on that stuff? But it's not that bad, really. Okay? And if you look at what happens, as soon as it comes out of the nuclear plant, the fuel rods, they're put in the water. In fact, they never remove it from the water. These fuel pools were one of the big issues in Japan. You have to keep these cool because these things produce heat for some time. And in Japan, because they couldn't circulate the water, the water boiled off and some of the fuel rods were exposed. And that's been one of the major sources of radioactivity. But in a well-managed thing that it's seismically isolated, and again, you know, we'll learn from Japan and we won't let that happen again. Okay? So, let's use Finland. They have 4 nuclear power plants, generating about 4,000 megawatts, I think. Okay? And over their entire life, 50-year life, planned life, they will produce 5,600 tonnes of spent fuel. Right? Assuming no reprocessing. 5,600 tonnes. Tiny amount. Easily fit inside this room. Easily fit inside this room. Okay? The high-level waste is initially extremely radioactive. Okay, but we put that under the water, and water is a fantastic shield for radioactivity, so none of it gets out past the water. Okay? After 1 year, it's down to 1/100th of its initial radioactivity when it came out of the reactor. After 40 years, it's down to 1,000th of its initial radioactivity. So all this bullshit that you hear from the greenies about we've got to bury it for 200,000 years, because that's how long it's dangerous for, is absolute rubbish. Okay? Most of the radioactivity, because of the half-lives of many of those elements are quite short, the half-lives decay and they're gone. So it is dangerous, but it's not as dangerous and it's not as long-lived as people would make it out to be. After 40 years, it's only toxic if you ingest it. So don't eat it. All right? Let's have a quick look at Australia.
Couple of minutes.
Done?
Couple of minutes.
Right. Australia contains 35% of the world's nuclear known uranium resources. In the 1950s, we came close to having our own system as a la Canada. We backed away, I think, when the government changed. We've got little potential for hydropower. Okay, we burn some of the worst coal in the world, and again, we're thinking of exporting it. It's a disgrace. Will we ever develop power? I have no idea. I hope so. I'm a firm believer. I'm not speaking on behalf of my company here. I'm speaking on behalf of myself and my children. I think it's an absolute way to go. And we want to go, you know, we're talking all this kerfuffle about carbon taxes and all this stuff to go back to 2010 levels of emissions. If we replace the brown coal in Victoria with nuclear power, we go back to 1940 emissions. 1930, I don't know. right? So, simple solution, really. We just got to have some political will. Nuclear power, it's better than you think. Thank you very much.
Thanks, mate. Thanks very much, Andrew. We'll have a few questions, Richard, if you don't mind. I'm sure there'll be a few questions generated from Andrew's great talk.
Be gentle with me.
Yeah, Cassie's got... Oh, and Pete's got the wine, so we're right now.
Thanks very much. Really enjoyable. It seems to me almost on what you're saying in those levels of radiation, and this sounds like spin, but you can actually see, or could you comment on the fact that this might be the best thing that ever happened to the nuclear industry if what you're saying is right, that Fukushima actually isn't a big deal?
Well, I suppose there's two comments I'd make about those levels of radiation. Like light, radiation drops away with the square of the distance. So if there's something radioactive, get away from it. And the faster you go away from it, the faster the radiation drops off. Okay, so that's why Fukushima is a very localised thing. But in terms of what you're saying, I agree. I mean, one of the world's great environmentalists and who's been anti-nuclear forever, George Monbiot, wrote in the UK Guardian a couple of days after the accident. He came out and said, for the first time, I believe in nuclear power, because we've had a massive earthquake. And you all saw, and my hair standing up on my arms just thinking about that goddamn tsunami and the effect that had. I mean, what an unbelievable, horrific thing. So the scale of that disaster, and yes, it's wiped out a 40-year-old plant and it's created a lot of damage, but they've really contained it. They've done a fantastic job. They've contained it. It's pretty much site-specific. There will be in my opinion, there will be no long-term ramifications for the environment. And I'm not even sure Chernobyl had really big long-term ramifications for the environment other than right on site. I mean, the problems with Chernobyl were really that the Russians didn't tell anyone it happened, and people kept drinking the water and drinking the milk and the water were poisoned with iodine. Now, all the iodine from here is gone already because it has an 8-day half-life. Okay? So I believe that you're right. Ultimately, it will show people that this is a safe industry. There's only ever been 3 accidents. 3 Mile Island killed no one. Chernobyl killed a couple of hundred, I don't know. And there's arguments about how much cancer it caused, but that was largely because they didn't tell anyone, and largely because it exploded outside the containment vessel and all the radiation got blown over Sweden and Finland, etc. But Fukushima killed no one from a radiation sense. 2 guys got killed by the tsunami. I believe another guy died the other day, but it wasn't from radiation. So, I think you're right. I think if this industry learns to promote itself correctly and educate people, that's the problem, is that people fear what they don't understand and fear what they don't know. And I believe that's what I'm passionate about, and that's what I've tried to do today, is give you some basic facts.
So one more question down here.
I've heard that uranium was used as a source of nuclear energy, mainly because initially it was a fuel for the bomb, whereas they could have chosen the thorium path.
I believe that's true. So what this gentleman's suggesting is that thorium is another well-known radioactive isotope. Initially, we could have developed reactors using thorium. They'd be a different design, but the decay of thorium, the nuclear decay of thorium, doesn't generate plutonium, and they wanted plutonium for their weapons programs. So that's also my understanding. So the greed of the Russians and the Americans in their arms race has led to the development of uranium as the fuel. Thorium is an absolutely good alternative. However, the research hasn't been done. There's only ever been one thorium reactor made, and in terms of commercialisation, it's 20 to 30 years away, I would suspect. So I think you're right. But, ultimately, what we need to look to is fusion. Fusion is the power of instead of splitting atoms, fusion is the power of joining atoms, which is the power of sun. But we're probably still 50 years away from fusion. Now, once we solve that issue, then we've got no more worries. But that's a way away. So until then, I see nuclear power and uranium and potentially thorium as that 50-year stopgap. But we've got to stop burning coal. That's really clear.
Just one more question there, Catherine, and then we'll call this bit quits.
Hi, my name is Dr. Barry Manor. I'm also an academic, ex-academic like you, and I must compliment you on your presentation. That was great.
Thank you very much.
Andrew, I've got a question, and this is not sort of fully informed, but it's something that I've heard, and I'd like your comment on it. In terms of life cycle of uranium, you showed a nice slide there of the extraction and enrichment at various stages. Now I've heard that with the current sort of nuclear generation global scenario, with about 420 odd power plants using fairly old technology, they are only able to extract about 20% of the energy available from a fuel rod before it becomes high-level radioactive waste. Now, we've got virtually no reprocessing research program except for France and Japan, as you mentioned. Germany shut theirs down, the UK has, the US has, because of safety concerns of various isotopes getting into the wrong hands.
Yeah.
Now, I've heard that the current levels of, or the percentage of uranium in the ore as it is today is you've got to put in a certain amount of energy to get that into the form of a fuel rod that you can put into a reactor, and that there is enough uranium known in our deposits today to keep the current nuclear industry going for about 15 or 20 years. And then beyond that, the levels of uranium in the ore go down by an order of magnitude, and you then require more energy input into processing them than you'll get out of them in the reactors.
No, the processing reactions, I understand exactly what you're saying, but the processing reactions where you convert, U3O8 to UF6 and then ultimately to uranium dioxide are chemical reactions and will never compare to the amount of power you get back from the nuclear reaction that you generate. But you're right. I mean, if you look at the history of uranium mining, we've traditionally, the same thing was gold in the 1980s. We never mined a gold deposit that was less than an ounce. And then we developed new technology such as carbon in pulp, carbon in leach, etc., which enables us now to mine gold at a gram. Well, I believe that those steps are coming in uranium, and we'll be looking at lower and lower grade deposits as time goes on. And you look at Trikopi in Namibia, mining at 150 ppm. The deposit that I look at is also large and low grade, but there's still orders of magnitude of power contained in the nuclear reaction that you don't have to worry about. So there's plenty of uranium. There's plenty of uranium being found.
I think I might stop you there because you've answered that question, Andrew. That's good. There's plenty of uranium. So I'd like you to thank Andrew for a great talk, mate. Well done. So that was good. So we got the last keynote here is Richard Karn, who's the managing editor of the Emerging Trends report. And I asked Richard to tell me who he was, and he refused explicitly because he said he's going to do it in his third slide, I think.
I'm going to answer your question, third slide. If everybody can do me a favor here and dig this up, that would be great. You're going to need this. It'll help me get through this presentation faster because this is going to be a rock and roll visit to 50 different metals. We are down here looking at precious and specialty metal projects because we discovered in 2005 when BASF Engelhard hired us to do research on a metal called ruthenium. Ruthenium is the minor or a minor platinum group metal. And my question was, hold on, I'm a retired professor of American literature and film. We do general research. Why do you want me? And their answer was, everybody's too damn specialized. They want to float their own boat and run their own agenda. We need some unbiased information. They wanted to know whether or not ruthenium was going to stay the main stabilizing influence on hard disk drives. They wanted to know whether or not it was going to maintain its relationship with rhenium in superalloys, blah, blah, blah. What happened was, next thing you know, a retired college professor is supposed to be one of the world's foremost experts on ruthenium. My point is this. We have become so complex, we've become so specialized, that there is certainly a place for generalists in this market, especially the market for specialty metals. Now, the reason this is because there's so little information out there. We'll just rock through here. I don't need that. Also, we generally use the term specialty metals here. When we say that, you can think, now you're hearing so many different names for this stuff. Every time I use specialty metals, You can think of industrial metals, minor metals, rare metals, technology metals, green metals, military metals, you name it. I'm naming the whole branch. Anything that is not an energy metal, anything that is not a base metal, we call a specialty metal. And this is important because we're going to talk about, let's put everything, but the big picture right here, right now, is that we are in an emerging market-driven commodity boom. We all know it. Look at the percentage these guys are doing. They're doing great. Everything is doing well. And as you would expect, the quote-unquote specialty metals, in this case happen to be industrial specialty metals, they're leveraged to it. Right? Think about it. What percentage do you need to put of manganese in your iron to make your alloy? Well, they're leveraged to it. Less is produced, more is needed, price goes up. Good idea, I'll kick that over. So this is the price movement we've been seeing in some of these metals that are tied directly to industrial uses. Obviously, I can only get 4 charts on here. Vanadium is another chart that should go on there. I killed it. Oh, there we go. Oh, there we go. Pointing the wrong way. Okay, here's some different specialty metals. I chose these 4 metals for a particular reason. Antimony is a metal that we're going to talk about a lot today because it's the poster child for what's going wrong with the specialty metal industry. Its primary use right now is in fire retardants, whether it's in children's clothing, emergency personnel clothing, whether it's the upholstery on the airplane, the upholstery in your car, the upholstery in your boat. All of that is thrown away when they're done with it. It's just dissipated. It's gone. About 55% of antimony use just goes out the window. It's not recycled. You can't recycle it. Niobium. This is very big in the automotive industry because it makes very light alloys that they use in the automotive industry. It's critical. The reason that we were able to get this excellent mileage out of these cars is because they get lighter and lighter and lighter. Tellurium. This is a pure technology metal. Whether you're talking about solar panels, whether you're talking about phase change memory, whether you're talking about, even petroleum cracking. It's a pure technology metal. But it's also, surprise, surprise, tellurium is rarer than platinum. It's very difficult to find on its own. It's almost all produced as a byproduct. Because of that, it is never produced on its own. In order to increase the production of tellurium, you have to increase the production of gold or copper, where they get the byproducts from. Then we have rhenium down here. Yesterday you heard Mr. Wolf or Dr. Wolf from Ivanhoe talk about rhenium. Rhenium is a fascinating metal, and we're going to come back and talk about it in a minute. But if there is one metal that is critical for the aviation industry, it is rhenium, because it allows the airplane engine temperatures to get so much higher. They can operate at better part of 3,000 degrees Celsius now, which means you get a more complete fuel burn, you get a better weight-to-thrust ratio, you can carry more and operate more economically, and guess what? You're also clean. There we go. Here are some specialty metal performances over the same 10-year period. Everything we're looking at here is 10-year period. These are very, very good returns. So why is it people didn't start capitalizing on this until last year? We wrote our report on this in 2007. I was doing research for BASF Engelhard and the ADIT funds in 2005 and 2006. Well, these are the drivers. Why is it being overlooked? One of the big reasons it's being overlooked is because there is so much baloney out there. We had Dr. Hames talking about all these things that are going weird on the planet. And I would submit that the social milieu that we have, part of it is internet-driven. And what I mean is that one of the things that we discovered on the internet, there are few things on the internet that are not polemic. Whether we just heard a talk on nuclear energy, or whether we're talking about anthropogenic global warming, or whether we're talking about religion, whether we're talking about fiat currency abuse. The internet is not bringing us closer together. It is isolating us and taking away. Everything's become black and white. It's taken away all the gray material in between at which we could compromise and make progress. We are essentially grinding to a halt because every issue is a polemic issue. And we're at a time now where we need to be working together. We have far larger problems. I'm sorry. I get a lot of grief because I don't care about anthropogenic global warming. I care about water and food. If there is one policy on the planet that should have people being put in jail right now, it's in the United States. And I could make comments, there's all kinds of things that we need to throw Americans in jail for. But the biggest one is ethanol. There are people all over the world that are starving, and fat, stupid Americans are jumping in their SUV to go down to the mall to get a bikini wax and a double decaf latte, and now everybody on the internet's watching them do it. Why? As a political boondoggle of an infinite magnitude. There is nobody who says any more whatsoever that ethanol is a viable energy source. However, the situation in politics is such that it doesn't matter how you get a bill passed in the United States. Once it's passed, they will never repeal it. What they will do instead is just keep adding on to it and making the situation worse as one bureaucracy after the other tries to find a way to solve it. This is starting to happen down here, and I would be alarmed if I were you. Another big problem with specialty metals is that they are traded off exchange. Even if you look at companies like Metal Prices or Bloomberg, they don't have a quoted price. They call somebody on the phone and say, "What did this guy pay last time?" That's how the quotes get out there. We just had a big run in antimony, and at one point the publicized price was about $16,500 a ton, and we were talking to people on the phone saying, "I just sold 2 tons at $19,000 because people are desperate for it." Quoted price is still $16,000, $17,000. All of these off-exchange traded metals are unhedgeable. Your financial sector, understandably, will not give you a loan. That's not me. Oh, good. I'm famous for that.
Hands up, whose it is. $50, Neil.
There you go. Many of these specialty metals are also generated as a byproduct or a co-product of other metal production, especially nickel, copper. These are big ones. And because of that, when you're arranging financing, one of the things that the bankers do, they say, okay, well, you're going to sell this forward, you're going to sell that forward, and get these credits for it. Well, you're undermining the price structure. This was a big problem in silver for a long time, until 2006, if I remember correctly. The majority of silver produced on the planet was not from primary silver mines, it was a byproduct. So this is how companies like Silver Wheaton can go around and buy up silver today at $4 to $6 an ounce when it's selling for $35 an ounce. The bankers said, well, you can make this, you can put this mine into production, but you've got to sell your silver for it. So Silver Wheaton, 6 guys, step in, I'll buy all the silver you make. I'll pay you $4 an ounce. And the banks are fine with that because they're getting their job. The silver market's going, what are you doing to me? And it's not stopping. This is one of the reasons the prices, when they move, they're so volatile. Now, the 2 big things I want to talk today are really about these next 2 things. The price of specialty metals, with the exception of industrial metals, the minor industrial metals, like the first 5 I talked to, they are almost entirely discovery-driven. This means that a metal like ruthenium, which for many years the South Africans didn't even bother processing. It was just too much work. By the time you get the platinum out of the ground, you take out the nickel, you take out the gold, you get everything else out. You get your platinum, your palladium, your rhodium, and then maybe some osmium and iridium, and what's left is literally a gas, smoke. And they precipitate the ruthenium out of the smoke. For many years, and one of the reasons we have no idea how much ruthenium there is in the world, they either didn't process it, they didn't record it, yada, yada, yada. And so ruthenium was just kind of those wanderable things. What you could call up the South African and say, hey, you got any ruthenium? And they say, well, I think so. How much do you want? You say, well, I don't know. Give me a couple hundred ounces of it. And they say, okay, we'll call you back. And they call you back. You'd negotiate a price on the phone. There was no spot market. And this is a huge, huge factor. And the last thing here is, we're going to talk about these 2 things almost entirely once I get going here. The free marketeers are in denial, and the neo-mercantilists are winning the game. And we're going to talk a lot about this. Now, but before we do, this was put out by Richard Bernstein the other day. I suggest you take a moment and look at this, because this is a very, very surprising chart. And while you're getting a hold on that, think about this. The analogy that I use when I'm trying to explain some things to people about money, and one of the reasons commodities are so volatile, is simply this. If you imagine all of the money in the world that goes into commodities, it would be like a puddle. If you imagine all the money in the world that goes into stocks, it would be maybe like a comparative pool. You get to treasury bonds, now you're talking lake. But when you get to the currency market, you're talking the friggin' Pacific Ocean. Now, this is a very critical concept. A lot of people in the industry refuse to get their head around. The reason commodities are so volatile is it doesn't take much sloshing of money from these bigger markets to have huge impact on the commodity market. This makes your job as producers very, very difficult. And when you look at this, I don't know how well you can read this. Can you guys read this okay? Any of you? This is how fast people are printing money. Okay? How fast people are printing money. And we come out over here on this far extreme side, and you see those four in orange. That's India at the top in the center, China right below them, Brazil, and Russia. And for those of you who are interested, Australia is right over here, right above the 10% thing, and the U.S. is over there right above the 5% thing. This is the rate of change on how fast they're printing money. Now, we talked about how weird things are in the press. Well, one of the things that we've had a war file going now for about 6 years, because very slowly, the United States is being held up and vilified for absolutely everything that goes wrong in the world. And, you know, there are many things, I'm not defending the U.S., trust me, I'm glad to be down here. But the point is, in a polemic world, the sides are opposite. Think about it. Today, who is pushing the hardest for a new reserve currency? Who is vilifying North America, or the Americans in particular, for their money printing? The Russians, the Chinese, the Indians, and China, who have also now been joined by South Africa, by the way. It's actually BRICS with an S now. Russia is printing at almost 30% per year, and they've got a 10% inflation rate. How long do you think that's going to run? I mean, obviously, these countries are growing very, very well. But how long do you think that they can print at 30% and maintain an only 10% inflation rate? And the worst thing of all is, you know, this comment is great. It really is the political class all over the world that we need to start watching. That's exactly right. These guys are all in cahoots. Fiat currency systems are predicated on the idea of a relationship between the government and the banking sector, the financial sector. The closer you are to the creation of money and the issuance of debt, the more profit you can make. By the time that trickles down to the guy on the street, the citizens, well, you've seen what's happened to your purchasing power. So this is an important idea to keep in mind. When you have the central banks of the world printing like mad, and the guys that are screaming the loudest, just like they were in 2007. You remember in 2007, right before end of 2007, beginning of 2008? You had everybody from Venezuela, from Hugo Chavez to Ahmadinejad to Merkel to everybody else saying everything that was going wrong was because the U.S. was printing too much money. Well, it turned out afterwards they were printing even faster too. Then the shit hits the fan. They all sat around and twaddled their thumbs, screamed and carried on, and did nothing. Unfortunately, the U.S., as a reserve currency, had to step in. You know, I don't want to go into the whole fiat currency thing because I can just start frothing at the mouth and it's really unsightly. But the simple truth is, this is a big influence. This is a big influence on your operational structures in your minds. You've got to get currency thinking in your thinking, because when we get into some of these other drivers, it's complicated. It's very complicated. The endless pursuit of higher quality, ever more efficient devices at an ever lower price. To my mind, that defines the last 200 years of capitalism. I can't think of a single thing I would add to that. These are actually integral drivers of the specialty metal market. We have a technologically enabled explosion in metallurgy and material science. And what this has been enabled by is between 1991 and 1993, there was an absolute explosion in cheap processing power. Suddenly, you could get computer power very, very inexpensively. Desktop computers. 3 or 4 years later, 96 to 99, what happens? We had an absolute explosion in modeling and analytical software. Now you've got two parts of a really big equation. But it took until 2001 to 2004 for them to solve the third part of the equation, and that is cheap data storage. We're going to come back and talk about data storage in a second, but the long and the short of it is, you put those three things together and you have an absolute explosion in how much research and development can be done. At the same time, the price of researching is going down. One of my contacts at Heraeus told me in 2006, he said, I can do more research now. I can do more research in 3 weeks than I used to be able to do in 15 to 18 months. And this is all just from this explosion. And it's self-reinforcing. So we have this situation where these R&D guys, this is another significant idea you have to get out of your head. Because of the 90s and our age, we have a tendency to freeze ideas in our head. And the simple truth is a lot of people still think that all these really cool Apple telephones and all these really neat things, they're coming out of the garages of college kids that they're working at night at their mom's garage. That's not the case. That hasn't been the case now for 20 years. All this R&D is a result of big money, very well funded, very well staffed, very dedicated services to do nothing but material science. If you want to invest in material science today, look at the recyclers. Look at the guys that do really sophisticated chemistry. Look at the Heraeus, Umicore, Johnson Matthey. Those guys are the urban miners of the future. So we have this situation where these metals, and we're going to look at all of them. By the way, you can check out that list. That's why I wanted you to have this. Here's the 49 metals we're looking at. You can look at that while I'm doing this. I'm going to go through some of these metals here real quick. But these things have limited substitution and trace amounts are used. That makes them absolutely price inelastic. Do you really think that Hitachi cares that the price of ruthenium goes from $60 to $900? They're using 1/100 of a gram. They don't care about that at all. We also have a whole bunch of these things that are they're produced either in absolute scarcity or they're a byproduct. That means they're supply inelastic. And that leads to the first one. Many of these have dissipative uses. And this renders them wholly unrecyclable. And this is and the fact that we don't insist on recycling protocols is a very significant failing on our parts as society. So, we got it down at the bottom here. We've got specialty metal demand, or the trajectory, is discovery driven. You don't have to think about any more about that than to look at those prices of the things I showed you earlier. But I'll give you a very concrete example that leads into two other ones. I mentioned that BASF Engelhard contracted us. At the time, it was our biggest contract, actually. It was fascinating. They wanted to know if ruthenium was going to continue to be used in hard disk drives. And frankly, I didn't even know what ruthenium was. Odd job qualification. They liked me because I didn't know what ruthenium was. What happened is, you have to go back a little bit further. I mentioned rhenium earlier in the aviation industry. All the third generation and fourth generation superalloys are nickel-based. They've got nickel, they've got tungsten, they've got vanadium, molybdenum, cobalt, you name it. All of them are in there. But you add rhenium to that list, and it becomes magical. The operating temperatures go up dramatically. But there reaches a point where when the rhenium level exceeds a certain amount, what happens is, suddenly, it becomes unstable. And there was this threshold they could not surpass. And they worked at it and worked at it and worked at it. And somebody said, hold on. They added ruthenium to these superalloys. It had no other use whatsoever except to stabilize the rhenium. And in so doing, they were able to boost the amount of rhenium, hence the operating temperatures and everything goes up. Well, 5-10 years later, they're stuck in this problem with longitudinal recording. We all remember this, our hard drives, a 1 gigabyte hard drive in 1998 was $1,000. Well, I just bought 1.5 terabytes for $49 at JB Hi-Fi. My point is, they couldn't get past this barrier. And this barrier was that all the data had to be stacked horizontally. And this is a question that's raised very significant and obvious questions about how many bits you could get on a disk, on a 3.5-inch disk. They'd known since the 70s you want to stack it vertically. If you can stack it vertically, you can increase the data. You can increase the density. You can increase the magnetism. Well, apparently somebody at, I think it was Hitachi, said, you know what, ruthenium did this really cool stuff for rhenium. So they looked at the platter on the hard drives, which when you stack things vertically, you're in between 12 and 14 different layers, different substrates of alloys, and they found out that sandwiching it between 2 layers of ruthenium, 1 micron thick, solved the problem. Magnetism went up, and this chart right here shows you how fast the growth in hard drive densities and the price fell at the same time. Now, I can talk about this stuff all day long, but let's think about something else. Let's think, everybody's crazy right now, for example, about...
A couple of minutes there, we can get questions in.
Okay. Everybody's crazy right now about electric vehicle batteries, lithium-ion batteries. Most people aren't aware, for example, that in order to make that fly, as Mr. Friedland points out, you need a hell of a lot of copper, and you need quite a bit of lithium. What they're not pointing out, though, is you need anywhere between 9 and 14 times more large flake graphite. Take a sheet of copper, print the graphite on it, put the lithium on it, roll it up, package it up, and you have a battery. Very simple. But everybody caught lithium, and everybody missed graphite. Large flake graphite is in very short supply. Now, I want to get to we'll just skip through this stuff and get to this part right here. We all have that list. Let's just skip down to the second to last one here, resource nationalism, because this is a big, actually the one above it too. We'll talk about China in a second. Everybody mark June 5th on your calendar. Does anybody know what happens on June 5th?
No.
There are federal elections in Peru. Fujimori is back in the lead right now, but his opposite number is named Humala, and he's a strident Marxist, and his campaign platform is, I'm going to nationalize them bastards. That's a lot of the people in this room. So mark that down. We've got increasing nationalism everywhere. This is, remember I showed you this chart? Who can tell me what these metals have in common? Anybody? I'll take hands. 3, 2, 1, time's up. They're all owned by China. Oh, I have to go there. They're all owned by China. It was very interesting. You know, this whole hoopla on rare earth elements really came to the fore starting in June when they made a cutoff. They've been doing this for years. We were expecting this to come, these announcements to come either on antimony, tungsten, or graphite, with other markets they happen to control. They'd already been doing it for rare earths. It wasn't a big surprise. Anybody in the industry has been seeing this happen time in, time out, just nonstop. And that gets us to here. I have to go through this so fast I can't tell you. This is what history tells us how the Chinese policies behave. Everybody knows that, when Deng Xiaoping came in, Mao is out there, stridently Marxist, killed 70 million people, killed mostly their smart people, but pretty much anybody they wanted to. Deng Xiaoping comes in and says to be rich is glorious. Problem is, we don't have anything to offer the world. We don't have a manufacturing base. What do we have? We have very cheap labor, and we've got a lot of minerals. We have no foreign currency reserves. We can't do anything. They focus on that entirely. It was just in their 5-year plan, year in, year out, or 5 years in, 5 years out. So what did they do? Well, they went out and they took market share all over the world. They just shut down for-profit mines all over the world. Well, you fast forward 25 years, where are we now? This is what they're doing. They're reducing production. This is inside China. Now that they control these metals. They're reducing production, the number of mine licenses and exports. They're increasing export taxes. They're imposing, they're what your question-answer people, imposing value-added taxes, and they are consolidating entire mining sectors into state-owned enterprises. Here's a classic example of that. In China is the world's largest producer of antimony. They had more than 1,000 mines. In the last year, they have taken those more than 1,000 mines, and they have condensed them into 10 state-owned enterprises. Now, the new ecological excuse for doing anything, and it's above reproach, just like in the U.S., you can't ever cut defense, you can't question defense, you can't question education, and you can't question Obama. But the new one is for environmental reasons. But they're doing it post facto. They are also, in the case of, it makes a lot of press, in the case of rare earth elements, antimony, tungsten, graphite, they are doing so and telling the world they're doing this while they're cutting off their exports of these materials, but they are not slowing the demand for the materials internally. This is an issue for the World Trade Organization. Anybody who goes to China, how many people have heard this? The only secrets in China are theirs. How many of you have talked to a CEO that let a Chinese person put a USB in his computer and pretty much lost everything that was on his computer. Intellectual property rights are toast. They're not making strides on this. They're moving the other way. And the last thing is, we think it's very likely that this year, probably by the end of this year, depending on what happens with the global political and economic situation, we think it's likely probably Japan and the EU will lead the charge to returning or bringing China before the World Trade Organization. And we think the results are going to be very unsettling. My take is they're going to say, fuck you, and walk away. We've got $3 trillion, we don't need you anymore. They've used it, they've got a lot out of it. Now, just to make sure that I'm universally, what's the right word? Misogyn? No, what's the right? Misanthropic. There it is, misanthropic. The West is equally blamed, equally at blame here. Don't kid yourself. We let this happen. We encourage this to happen. We encourage this to happen. They had cheap resources. We wanted them. We got so wrapped up in the idea of our profit horizon being the next quarter. We got the disease called short-termism. We got so focused on next quarter's profit instead of 10 years of supply of these metals. We were so concerned, so many of our executives, especially in the United States, they were so concerned with their making the numbers, so they could get their bonus. They only have to make the numbers 3 or 4 times and they can retire. If you're in the banking sector, you only have to make it once.
Wrap it up there, Richard.
Okay, I'm wrapping it up right now. So, here we go. This is all you need to know. We'll skip this stuff, go right here. Read these equations, guys. This is what's happening. I don't have time to read it to you. Our take on this is specialty metal prices are going to not only continue to go, they're going to go hard and fast. They are slower and harder to bring online. They are far more sophisticated to develop. They are far more expensive to develop. And the sweet spot, as far as we're concerned, and granted, we're very conservative money. I represent very conservative money. Australia is in the absolute sweet spot of this. Of the 49 metals that are on that list there, Australia is going to produce 40 of them. The very, very interesting thing is if you've been following this market, well, obviously you have, you're in it. The mid-cap producers this year have underperformed the large caps and the small caps significantly. What's going to happen is all the big boys, their stock prices are high. Those are free companies waiting to be picked off. It's going to accelerate. You've got a lot of money from Europe and the United States that's going to be coming this way because they just burned up everything to invest in North America. Penny stocks are doing 200 or 300% a day now in the U.S. It's just insane. So down here, the 2 things we like a lot, the 3 things, mid-caps, the proven micro-cap deposits. You have deposits all over the place of these specialty metals, and because they're unhedgeable, because you can't get a loan, they're sitting there doing nothing. I'm involved with private equity money now for companies I can't write up for my subscribers and my sponsors just because I come across so many opportunities. And there are a whole bunch of guys down here that are better than I am at this because I'm kind of fresh to the game. And there's going to be a lot of this. But the big one down here are these historic producers that got closed not because they ran out of ore. They got closed because they got cut off at the knees on price. So I appreciate your time. I got as much in as I could. If you have a question, we have to do it now.
I think. Thank you very much, mate. That's good. we don't probably have time for questions. So what I'm going to ask Richard to do is draw Peter Graham Sutton's wine draw for us, if you could do that. And bloody hell, where it all coming from everywhere. And Steve, perhaps Andrew, could you draw the one and announce them?
You got a chance at the trifecta, Nick.
Oh, that's right, yeah. Oh, beauty. Who won that? Bruce.
What's that?
Bruce Griffin.
Okay.
And Peter?
I have great pleasure in saying this gentleman is a customer of mine, Steve Finlayson from ALS Laboratories.
Oh, no. Well, again, I'd like to thank our 2 speakers this morning who've done a jolly good job. Thanks, guys. It was really good, both of them. So thank you. Now, I'm just going to give a few closing remarks. Unfortunately, Kerry can't be here at the moment, so I'm just going to give a bit of an address, and then we're going to go into the concluding ceremony. Oh, here's the drinkers. Good, good. Now, I'll probably be stating a few mistruths during this talk. I'll try and let you know when they are happening, but if you don't, just bear with me. And I want to start off by some blatant Carpenteria bloody advertising. Look, we've got 2 cups. What have you got? Hey, how good is that? And I kissed a camel. Now, last night was a tremendous night. It was really good fun. But as a Queenslander, and on the day of the state of origin, I was truly and utterly offended. I mean, Vince said, what's the difference between... Well, I'll start again. But Vince's remark about Queenslanders and yogurt and no culture. It was disgusting. I mean, that's just not right. But I'm sure we'll make right tonight when Queensland wins the state of origin. Yeah, I was very lucky. Well, the 2 did, didn't they? So, what a great conference we've had, and it's just so good that we can finish off on a positive note. Unfortunately, my mate Ian Plimer can't be here, which is great. So I can unmercifully sledge the bastard. So I was just wondering what you think the difference between Ian Plimer and a toilet is. Any answers here? Well, I think that you can put the lid down on a toilet. So I was wondering... I better stop there. I think I'm one up on Plimer now. Okay, I just got... Now, this symposium has been really good, and it was so marvellous to have it in Broken Hill. Broken Hill has been a birthplace of many great things, and I'm sure we've been through this quite a few times this last couple of days, but really it's a world-class mining district, and it looks to me that it's being rebuilt. This conference has shown quite a few presentations where there are things happening around Broken Hill that's going to rebuild it. In 1883, a syndicate of 7, led by one Charles Rasp, they discovered that magnificent lode. In 1884, they became the syndicate of 14. And in 1885, they became the Broken Hill Proprietary Company, or BHP as we know them today. So, it's amazing. I'd like to sort of use those immortal words of Lara Bingle. Where the bloody hell are they? Where is BHP? They were born here and they couldn't be bothered coming. Bastards. Perhaps that's what the B stands for. In 1905, Zinc Corp was formed to produce the zinc, using flotation to produce zinc. This sort of morphed various ways into CRA and then this apparent merger with Rio. So again, what do Lara say? Where the bloody hell are they? They couldn't even be bothered coming. It's incredible. But the most noticeable absentee here is the current miner on the lode. Why haven't they bothered to come and bloody help and present? I'm amazed. They state on their website, in 2010, Perulia achieved a significant milestone. Its first 8 years of successful operation in this Broken Hill mine. The company has brought a new lease of life to the historic Broken Hill mine since acquiring it in June 2002. During these 8 years, Perulia mined approximately 15 million tonnes of ore, shipped 800,000 tonnes of zinc, and 450,000 tonnes of lead. So they've done quite well, really. And I guess you know what I'm going to say now. Where the bloody hell are they? It's absolutely disappointing that these guys have not really come to the fore. So, given that disappointment, let's let that rest, and hopefully next year the big ones will come. We've had some really good Anglo Newcrest support. It's been marvellous. So, we'll put that behind us and let's try and push them into coming next year. So, with all that negativity, I would just like to say what a great conference this has been. It's been really good that I believe it's the start of something big. And, whoops, I've got the dates for the next. Rob refused to give us the dates last night, but we're going to have it on the 20th to the 23rd of May next year. We'll keep these dates so we know where we are. It's been inspiring to have different sorts of talks. We've had a whole spectrum of talks here, and this is what this whole conference is supposed to be about. We want to invoke thoughts. People might think we're preaching to the converted, but we're actually not. We were told that we've got to pull our socks up. We've got to really do better in the mining and the exploration. We've got to talk to our stakeholders. There's a lot of things we should be doing better, and we can do it better. And I think this sort of forum will be a great one in the future to get gentlemen like this and all the other keynote speakers to give us a bloody good kick up the ass. Make sure that we're doing it properly. So I'm really happy that we've done this this symposium. It's been really good. I know I won't rabbit on anymore, but I'd like to thank all the presenters who came here to do the work, to do the hard yards. But importantly, it's the people like Kerry and Rob who thought of this 3 years ago and got this thing going. So I'd like to especially thank those two people and give them a round of applause now, people.